educational only. This is not medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have ongoing concerns about energy, sleep, blood pressure, hormones, prostate symptoms, diabetes, heart health, or medication interactions, talk to a qualified healthcare professional. For a lot of men over 50, the first thought is simple. What can I take tonight? A stronger supplement, a stronger herb, a stronger shortcut. It sounds practical, but it often asks the wrong question. The real problem is usually not a lack of willpower. It is a system that has been under strain for years. Energy changes in the body rarely come from one switch. They come from many smaller systems working together, and when one part slides, the whole day feels flatter. That is why this video starts with a different idea, not a quick fix, not a miracle claim, just a slower, clearer way to think about vitality, healthy aging, and the reserve your body depends on. This is not a video about replacing a doctor, and it is not a video about telling you what to take. It is a video about how to think. If you can see the system more clearly, you make better decisions about sleep, food, movement, herbs, supplements, stress, and when to ask a professional for help. Many health messages aimed at men are built around urgency. They sell speed and intensity. That frame creates pressure, but it does not create clarity. When the topic is vitality, clarity is more valuable than hype. So this documentary takes the slower route. We will translate old wellness language into modern language, examine what the body actually needs, and keep the line between education and treatment very clear. That slower route matters because people often confuse density with depth. A video can sound packed with advice and still leave the viewer with nothing usable. The aim here is the opposite. Fewer claims, clearer structure, and enough room for the ideas to settle. When the pacing is calmer, the viewer can actually notice the difference between a claim and a condition. The wrong question is not just what can I take tonight? It is also what is the fastest thing that might make me feel better for a few hours. That question is tempting because it matches frustration. You feel tired, so you want energy. You feel slower, so you want something stronger. You feel older, so you want the feeling to go away. But temporary intensity is not the same as real support. If sleep is poor, if stress is too high, if movement is too low, if recovery is incomplete, then a stimulant can only borrow from tomorrow. It cannot rebuild the base. Instead of asking what will hit hardest, ask what is missing. What part of the system needs support? That question is less dramatic, but it is usually much more useful. A shortcut is emotionally efficient. It lets you stay focused on the feeling you want while avoiding the harder question of why the feeling faded in the first place. That is human, and it is understandable. People want relief, but relief without a plan can become a loop. A man starts with fatigue, reaches for something stimulating, gets a little boost, then notices that the same tiredness returns. The next search becomes more urgent. The promise gets stronger. The cycle gets more expensive. That is why a better question changes everything. It breaks the loop before it becomes a habit. That change in question matters because the body rarely improves on command. It improves when conditions become friendlier. The task is not to bully the system into a better mood. It is to create a setting where the system can do its job without constant interference. That is also why good advice often looks boring at first. Boring is sometimes just repeatable. When people say vitality, they often mean one feeling: more drive, more stamina, more confidence, more spark. But in real life, vitality is not one feeling. It is the result of several conditions being good enough at the same time. Circulation matters, sleep matters, stress matters, movement matters, metabolism matters, recovery matters, reserve matters. You can think of it like a table with many legs. If one leg is weak, the whole table still stands for a while, but it wobbles. If two or three legs weaken, the wobble becomes the story. That is why a man can feel fine one day and flat the next. The issue is not always a dramatic failure. Sometimes it is a slow accumulation of small shortages that make the body work harder for the same result. There is a difference between output and reserve. Output is what the body can do in a moment. Reserve is what remains after the moment passes. Many men pay attention only to output. They care whether they can push through today, finish the week, or get through the next task. But reserve is what determines whether the next week feels normal or heavy. If reserve is low, even a good day feels expensive. The body is not only doing work. It is paying interest on the work it has already done. That is not a message of decline. It is a message of accounting. Energy has a balance sheet. If you only look at income and ignore spending, you misunderstand the whole picture. This is also why people can be confused by their own results. They may eat well for a few days, sleep a little better, and assume nothing changed because the transformation was not dramatic. But small changes often matter precisely because they alter the baseline. A slightly better baseline can make the next week easier in ways that are hard to notice moment by moment. Ancient Chinese wellness used different language, but the useful translation is surprisingly straightforward. Warmth means activation. Flow means circulation. Recovery means rest and repair. Reserve means your long-term battery. None of those ideas needs to become mystical. They can be read as plain health language. Warmth is about getting the system going. Flow is about delivery. Recovery is about the body repairing itself after strain. Reserve is about how much capacity you still have left after the day is done. That is why the older vocabulary still matters. Not because it gives a magic answer, but because it reminds us to look at the whole system instead of only chasing one sensation. There is a tendency to turn traditional language into exotic branding, especially online. A term gets lifted out of its context, wrapped in bold graphics, and used to imply hidden power. That can be entertaining, but it can also flatten the original idea. The better approach is simpler. Keep what is useful and discard what is vague. If warmth means activation, ask whether you are moving enough during the day, sleeping enough at night, and eating in a way that supports steady function. If flow means circulation, ask whether the body is getting regular movement, hydration, and enough daily rhythm to keep things moving. In that sense, Ancient wellness is not a rival to modern thinking. It is a different map for the same body. The value of the map is that it helps you ask better questions. If you think in terms of warmth, flow, recovery, and reserve, you are more likely to notice missing pieces. Good language should improve attention, not trap it. That is what makes translation more useful than mystique. Blood flow is one of the clearest places where men notice the difference between short-term feeling and long-term support. When circulation is working well, the body can deliver oxygen, nutrients, and heat where they are needed. When it is not, everything feels slower. The body takes longer to wake up. The day takes more effort to get through. Confidence can drop simply because the body feels less responsive. That does not mean every problem is a circulation problem. It means circulation is one of the core systems worth paying attention to before you reach for shortcuts. A better question is not whether something can create a stronger feeling tonight. It is whether the body is actually getting what it needs to function well tomorrow morning, next week, and next month. Confidence is often treated as a mental issue, but it is rarely only mental. When the body feels sluggish, under-recovered, or unresponsive, confidence drops because the lived experience changes. You do not need to label that as weakness. It is simply feedback. That feedback is useful because it points toward conditions, not character. If a man feels less confident when he is exhausted, that does not mean he has failed at confidence. It means his body is asking for better conditions. Supportive habits matter here. Regular walking, some strength work, enough protein, fewer long stretches of sitting, and less nightly overload all support the systems that shape how strong and steady the day feels. No one habit is magic. The point is the pattern. The body likes useful demand, not extreme demand. Useful demand. Enough to remind the system that it still has work to do. When the pattern improves, the body often feels more capable. And when the body feels more capable, confidence usually follows. This is why men sometimes describe feeling more like themselves after a stretch of basic consistency. They did not discover a miracle. They simply removed enough friction that the body could settle into a more stable pattern. That kind of shift can be quiet from the outside and still feel significant from the inside. Sleep is not downtime. It is a repair process. When sleep is too short, too light, or too interrupted, the body starts the next day with less available reserve. That can show up as lower patience, lower energy, lower focus, and a lower tolerance for stress. Recovery is not only about being in bed, it is also about how the day is arranged. Bright light in the morning, enough movement during the day, less stimulation at night. A calmer transition before sleep. These things matter because they tell the body when to build and when to rest. If you keep asking the body to perform while withholding recovery, it eventually pushes back. The answer is rarely another stimulant. Usually it is better recovery. Recovery has a schedule. It is not random. It responds to cues. Morning light helps set the day. Movement helps mark the day. Calmer evenings help close the day. If those cues are missing, the body can drift. That drift may not be dramatic at first. It can look like average sleep, average energy, and average mood. But average over a long period can still be a problem if the average is being pulled down by repeated under-recovery. The practical lesson is simple. Do not wait until you are exhausted to care about sleep. By the time the body is desperate, you have already spent too much reserve. Sleep also changes the way the next day feels before the day even begins. A better night can make food choices easier, patience stronger, and training less punishing. A poor night can make the simplest task feel heavier. When people say they are just tired, they sometimes mean the body has been paying a hidden debt for a long time. If the goal is sustainable vitality, sleep deserves to be treated like a serious practice, not a background detail. The key point is not that every night must be perfect. It is that the body needs a reliable rhythm more than it needs one heroic reset. A few good nights, repeated, are worth more than one dramatic correction followed by the same old routine. That rhythm gives the body a predictable window to recover instead of constantly improvising. The stress is not just a feeling, it is a body state. When the nervous system stays in high alert too long, the body stops acting like a place that can restore itself. It starts acting like a place that is always preparing for the next demand. That can look like tension, shallow breathing, poor sleep, or a constant sense that the day never quite settles. It can also show up as the feeling that you are always behind, even when nothing dramatic is happening. The goal is not to eliminate stress. That is not realistic. The goal is to keep stress from becoming the BODY Chinese letter permanent operating mode. Slower breathing, clearer routines, and more predictable daily movement are practical solutions. They tell the nervous system that the threat level is lower than it thinks. Some men feel more alert but less well when they are constantly on. They can perform in the short term, but their body never gets a full downshift. That can make energy feel wired rather than replenished. The goal is to move between effort and rest without getting stuck in effort. That flexibility is a sign of resilience. When stress is managed better, many other things improve at once. Sleep gets deeper. Appetite becomes more regular. Training feels less punishing. Recovery gets a little easier to access. That is the practical reason to care about the nervous system, even if you are not interested in wellness language. A calmer baseline makes nearly every other habit easier to keep. If your whole life feels like it is running on alarm mode, you spend more energy merely returning to neutral than actually living in the day. Reserve is the part most people ignore until it is low. You can have enough energy for one task and still not have enough reserve for the day. That gap becomes more visible with age because the body no longer bounces back as easily from every stressor. Think of reserve like a battery that is no longer brand new. It can still work well, but it needs more careful charging and less reckless draining. If you spend it aggressively every day, the decline becomes obvious. Healthy aging is not about pretending you are 25. It is about protecting the capacity you have now so that the next decade is not built on constant depletion. That is a more honest definition of aging well. It does not promise endless youth. It promises function, steadiness, and less unnecessary friction. Men often notice reserve only when it starts disappearing in obvious ways. The morning gets heavier. The body takes longer to warm up. The return to normal after stress takes more time. None of those changes means collapse. They mean the margin is narrower. The answer is not panic. The answer is maintenance. Reserve is built by small things repeated long enough to matter. Reserve is not the same as comfort. A man can be comfortable and still be depleting himself. He can sit more, move less, and eat in a way that feels easy in the moment while gradually lowering the BODY Chinese letter tolerance for effort. That is why reserve deserves a separate word. It tells us that the goal is not merely to feel okay right now. The goal is to leave enough capacity for later. That is the difference between managing a day and building a life. Reserve also shows up in ordinary life long before it shows up in a lab or a chart. It shows up in whether errands feel light or heavy, whether social time feels easy or draining, and whether a hard day still leaves a little left in the tank. Those are the places where people first notice the battery is different, even if they never use that word. Herbs and traditional remedies are part of many cultures, and they deserve respect. But respect is not the same as hype. An old tradition is not automatically a strong fix, and a natural ingredient is not automatically safe for every person in every context. That is why the right frame is caution and curiosity. What is this tradition trying to support? Is it intended as a daily habit, a seasonal practice, or a short-term tool? What else is the person taking? What health conditions are already present? When people ask whether something ancient is powerful, the better question is often whether it is appropriate. That is a much more useful standard than miracle language. Traditional language can be valuable because it preserves observation across time. People noticed patterns long before modern labels existed. They noticed that rest mattered, that certain foods felt grounding, and that some preparations seemed to support warmth or calm. Those observations are worth studying. But historical usefulness does not remove the need for modern caution. An herb can still interact with medication. A supplement can still be poorly matched to the person taking it. A tradition can still be overclaimed by a seller trying to make a sale. So the healthy posture is balanced. Respect the tradition. Verify the details. Stay skeptical of dramatic promises. This balance also makes the video more credible. If everything old is sacred and everything modern is suspect, the viewer is forced into a false choice. A better approach is to respect the insight without suspending judgment. That is what keeps the ideas useful over time instead of turning them into a brand. Supplements are where many men get into trouble because the label sounds harmless while the effect can still be significant. A product can contain multiple ingredients. It can interact with medications. It can affect blood pressure, sleep, mood, digestion, or heart rate. It can be the wrong fit even if it works well for someone else. That is why the safest habit is to treat supplements as something to review, not something to assume. Read the label, check the dose, and consider what else you already take. And if you have ongoing health concerns, talk to a qualified healthcare professional before you add anything new. The goal is not fear. The goal is precision. When a product is sold as supportive rather than medical, people can assume it is automatically gentle. But supportive does not mean irrelevant. It only means the effect may be indirect or incomplete. The supplements deserve the same kind of attention you would give any tool that changes how the body behaves. The question is not whether the label sounds healthy. The question is whether it fits the person, the dose, the timing, and the rest of the person Chinese letter routine. If you are dealing with persistent fatigue, sleep disruption, blood pressure issues, blood sugar issues, or other ongoing concerns, professional guidance is the right move. The video can organize thinking. It cannot diagnose you. The safest habit is to slow down the buying process. Read ingredients. Compare goals. Ask whether the product is actually necessary or whether the body would be better served by sleep, movement, food quality, and a medical conversation if symptoms are persistent. Slower is often safer, and safer is usually more effective over time. The point is not to shame people for wanting help. It is to make help more accurate. If you are going to spend money or attention on a supplement, it should be because you understand why you are taking it and what job it is supposed to do. If you want a starting point, keep it simple for 7 days. Walk every day, sleep earlier. Lift a few times a week if your body allows it. Eat enough protein. Breathe slower. Reduce the habits that drain you fastest. Keep your routines boring and repeatable. Do that and you start to see the real pattern. Energy is not a single switch. It is a system, and systems change slowly by design. Educational only. Not medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have persistent concerns about energy, sleep, circulation, blood pressure, hormones, prostate symptoms, diabetes, heart health, or medication interactions, talk to a qualified healthcare professional. The reason this 7-day reset matters is not that it solves everything. It is that it gives you a clean baseline. Once the baseline is calmer, the signal becomes easier to read. You can tell what helps, what hurts, and what just adds noise. That matters because many men have spent years reacting to symptoms without ever stepping back to notice the pattern. A reset creates that step back. It gives the system a chance to breathe. If the habits feel too simple, that is usually the point. Real support is often less dramatic than the marketplace suggests. It does not need to be loud to be effective. So the takeaway is straightforward. Support reserve, reduce noise, and keep the body in a state where recovery is possible. That is the path this video is arguing for. And it is the one worth taking if you want a longer view of vitality. And if you want to personalize it, do that with care. Your age, medications, sleep quality, medical history, and daily stress load all change the answer. That is exactly why the ending points you toward a qualified healthcare professional instead of a one-size-fits-all promise. The best long-term strategy is rarely dramatic. It is usually consistent, modest, and repeatable. That is the real promise of this video, not a shortcut, but a framework. Not a burst of intensity, but a way to think that keeps working after the video is over. If the viewer leaves with that structure, the video has done more than entertain them for a few minutes. If you remember one sentence from the whole video, remember this: vitality is not one switch. It is a system, and the system gets easier to support when you stop chasing the feeling and start respecting the conditions that create it. That is the difference between a quick fix and a real direction. One is loud and short-lived. The other is quieter, but it lasts. If this feels less exciting than a promise of instant energy, that is intentional. A real framework should feel usable, not magical. The best health guidance usually sounds a little ordinary because ordinary is what you can repeat. Repetition is where the result comes from. That is also the quiet test for any advice in this space. If it is only attractive when you are frustrated, it may be selling relief. If it still makes sense when you are calm, it is more likely to be useful. That is the standard this whole video tries to hold.